walk with them through whatever it is that they're experiencing. They're there to provide emotional support, education, share information about resources, help them navigate different systems. So that might be the criminal legal system or the civil legal system.
Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the TF Cast. I'm Willis.
Hey, Grum here. It is November 8th here in the Solarium.
And I'm your host, Jacob Bases. Today with us, we have Julia Hamann from the CADA shelter here to talk to us about what's going on over there and your work and just kind of an update from the past month, DV Awareness Month. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
So, Julia, if you can introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about your work there and what's going on.
So my name's Julia Hamann. I'm the Director of Community Programming for CADA, also known as the Committee Against Domestic Abuse. I'll add, oftentimes in the community, we're called CADA House. That comes from our grassroots origins, where we actually started as a house that was housing people as a shelter kind of situation, but we actually are have grown quite a bit now, and we do have a building, an office building, and a secure shelter facility. So we do go more by CADA now, but commonly people still call us CADA House. So I like to put that caveat out there. We also have surrounding satellite offices. So our region serves 9 surrounding counties around, including Blue Earth County. And we have, I think it's 7 satellite offices in the surrounding counties as well. So although we have a shelter here in Mankato, we're much more than a shelter. We have community advocacy services to support survivors, and we also have a supervised visitation center here in Mankato. And we do community education programming as well. I don't know how much detail I should get into about our services.
But I think uniquely it might be cool if you would just let us know how to contact CADA right up front here where everyone's listening.
Yes, there's lots of ways to contact CADA. So we have our helpline, which is probably the most common way, 800 477-0466, I believe. And we have our website, cadamn.org. And on the website, there's a chat feature that folks can reach out through. There's an email form. Also, if people are wanting to talk to an advocate, they can email outreach@cadamn.org. Lots of different ways, or they can walk in if it's not safe to call or text or email, and they need to just walk in and ask for support. We take walk-ins too.
I think something that might be really, because I think a lot of people have a good idea of like what kind of circumstances might require someone to reach out or like to need this. But I think a lot of times people don't exactly understand what an advocate does. So I think it could be really useful for you to like break down what it is that the advocates do, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, certainly. So the most basic way that I like to describe an advocate is a cheerleader or somebody on that victim survivors team that is there to walk with them through whatever it is that they're experiencing. They're there to provide emotional support, education, share information about resources, help them navigate different systems. So that might be the criminal legal system or the civil legal system. It might be community resource system. And yeah, just kind of be that person on their team that they can go to that's going to understand what it is that they're experiencing in a unique way that not everybody in their life might understand. It's a non-judgmental, confidential, free service that is survivor-centered. So that's another really important piece of advocacy is we're not there to tell survivors what they need to do or how they should feel or how they should respond to their experience of violence. We're not telling people they need to leave a relationship. We're just giving them information and resources to help them make informed decisions about what it is that they want to do.
Sure. And I think a little bit later, probably we're going to get into some things about like what makes like CADA possible. But a really important thing to me, at least, is this is something that people have brought upon themselves to do, to make this organization. What does a community that does not have an organization like CADA, like what kind of options do people like that have?
Oh, that's a really great question. I believe that every county in the state of Minnesota does have a victim service organization. It might not be directly in their county, but they do have an organization that is serving their county. So although it might not be in their town, they should have somebody that they can call. They might not have a shelter, and so there's different kind of levels of services that are provided, but there is a national hotline and there's a statewide hotline. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but they're easily Googleable that people can contact and then get connected to the resources that are most closest to them.
And are those other programs similar with the with regard to like having advocates and kind of people who understand the process a little bit and can help give advice and or help?
Yeah, I think that's the hope. I can't speak for
Sure.
other organizations necessarily because I haven't been there or seen their services, but I think across the state of Minnesota, I think we generally do a pretty good job of having that advocacy lens. There's actually, Minnesota is kind of at the forefront of the movement, even when it started. And so they, up in Duluth actually, were really key in how we still understand violence today. They created what's called the Power and Control Wheel. They kind of pioneered some of the first domestic violence transformation programming, which is for people that use violence. So I think Minnesota does a pretty good job of providing those services and having that victim-centered or survivor-centered lens.
The question you asked too, Jacob, was like what's someone's experience when they don't have access to these services? And I mean, without knowing, and I think you answered it a little bit, but without knowing much more, it's like it could be really difficult to like know what your options are probably.
Absolutely.
And so I think that like when I'm hearing it, the advocate approach, like someone who does know a bit more about the options and like has some history of experience with this type of thing, really like having someone on your team, is probably just huge, because I think about that as being something that's probably very alienating or like I don't know what the exact right word there is, but
Isolating,
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an intentional aspect of abuse too.
Sure.
Perpetrators of violence will intentionally isolate a victim to make them more vulnerable to the abuse and make it harder for them to leave and have more power and control over that person. When you were speaking too, I was thinking like another core piece of advocacy is that education, because lots of people, they might know that they don't feel safe in their relationship, or they might know that like something's not right. They don't like how they're being treated, but they might not have the language to really describe their experience. And I think that's another reason that advocacy is so vital, is that we can give survivors that language that then helps them know how to navigate their experience, identify and be validated in their experience, and then know how to move forward and heal.
Yeah, because you could know something that like doesn't feel good, but without being able to describe it, like who's capable of like handling that?
Well, and I think an important thing about this too, I may be mistaken, but like a lot of people don't want to be identified as victims, and also a lot of these people are like being told all around them what to do, how to handle the situation. People are trying to forcibly remove them from the situation. And just like with addiction, these choices don't stick unless they're made like by the person themselves. So like there's only so much intervening you can do.
The real root of my question, and I think it has been kind of pointed at, was that I imagine the circumstances that caused an organization like CADA to emerge is that whatever was happening on account of the status quo was easily manipulated by the people who have power. Like, so if you're trying to isolate someone, like, back when women didn't have control of their banking information, like it was normal for them to be easily controlled in that way. Now that's a common way that people manipulate people is by controlling their finances. So like knowing that could be a form of abuse, like, and having someone who understands that. But whereas like I feel like if you brought that to another part of the county or like some other government service and said this is happening, they might be like, well, that's not illegal, and it doesn't speak to the problem.
Yeah, that can happen. And that's another piece of, so it's not a piece of advocacy, but it's a piece of CADA's work, is educating other professionals on signs and that, and red flags that somebody they're working with might be experiencing abuse, and how to support them through that, how to respectfully express concern and offer resources if that's what the person they're working with is open to having that conversation. We certainly don't want to pass judgment or make people feel forced to seek resources when they don't identify that way. But
I guess kind of to like pivot on the resources point too. How is a organization like CADA funded? How do you find yourselves to be?
Yeah. So we are primarily funded through the Office of Justice Programs, which is state funding. And they also, I believe, manage our federal funding and funnel that to statewide organizations, victim service organizations as well. We do get some local grants, and we get donations. We have our annual fundraiser. Yeah.
Yeah, because it does seem from just, listening to you talk in the introduction that it is an organization that just continuously gives. Like there isn't any, there shouldn't, you shouldn't make money off of that in the way that, you think of like selling a product, obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yes. Yep, we are a nonprofit, and our services are free for accessibility.
And I guess we wanted to talk a little bit more about some recent changes in that program, because I know the last couple of years have been, I guess, a little bit volatile, even through previous presidential office holders changing things up, and the way that these programs are getting funded continuously shifting. So can you talk a little bit about what the experience has been like maybe over the last couple of years for an organization like CADA, and maybe like where things are at now?
Yeah. So, like I said, we're largely dependent on that state and federal funding, and so that means we're very vulnerable to the opinions and whims of people that are in office and that are allocating those funds. In past years, we've feared cuts to funding, and we actually haven't had an increase to our base funding in about 10 years. So basically, every year we're asked to do more and more work with less dollars, and that is we're seeing across the state, and I think even across the nation, that's just not sustainable. Advocates are burning out left and right. We're hearing from executive directors from organizations across the state that we're seeing the same things all over, that just there's lots of turnover, people are leaving, it's harder to hire because it's high stress, high trauma work. And with that lack of increase in funding, we haven't been able to increase wages and compensate people for their efforts. This year, we were very hopeful that we would get a significant increase because we did have maybe a more favorable alignment in our local government, and we had a large surplus. And we requested an increase to that base funding, and we got a fraction of what was requested. At CADA specifically, we requested about a $1.5 million increase to just to be able to maintain the services as we provide them currently, while paying our staff a livable wage, having proper healthcare, affordable healthcare options, having retirement options, and having all of the positions that we really need to do the work in a way that's sustainable for staff and supportive to staff. And we ended up getting a $300,000 increase, so just a fraction of what we requested. And some organizations across the state got much less than that or didn't see an increase. And so we're seeing a lot of struggling victim or survivor or service organizations. There was recently a shelter in Minnesota called, I think, 360 Communities that is going to be closing their doors this month. And that, we're already short on beds across the state. So that's going to impact our community too. I mean, when CADA is full, we look across the state of where people can go if they're seeking shelter, and to have one less space is going to make, that will impact our community. CADA has also felt the impacts of that funding. We've had to close our Southern Minnesota Offender Education Program that worked with perpetrators of violence to help them recognize why they use violence, understand what violence is, and hopefully see a better way of engaging in their relationships moving forward. So our real true prevention work, in my opinion. We also had to cut our prevention and education programming, and we had to close a supervised visitation center that we had in New Ulm. So we're feeling the impacts too, and we're seeing the impacts of stressed staff and doing everything that we can. And with the increase we did get, we were able to raise wages, but with inflation, I mean, that's going to be not have as much of an impact quickly, I think, too. So, and we weren't able to add the positions that we would have liked to make workloads more sustainable. So, and we are having to have difficult conversations about where we might have to scale back on the services that we do provide. And that's going to have impacts on survivors and our communities overall, public health, safety.
What do you think is causing the failure to see the need to fund these programs, I guess? Is that I don't know if I'm phrasing that right. Do you think it's like a lack of understanding of the importance, people not knowing these programs exist or what they actually provide? Because it sounds like across the board, people are asking for funding and getting much less, in your case, like 20% of what you asked for. I was just wondering if you see any reason for that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I think it's lack of political will. The people that are determining how much money we get aren't hearing from their constituents that that's what they want to be funded.
Yeah, so it's like a vote. It's like a voters thing. They're not going to get more votes by providing these funding, so they don't. Is that? Okay. Yeah,
or that's not what they're hearing from their constituents.
Yeah.
And I think part of that comes to a cultural idea that violence is a private family issue and that it's not a public issue, and it's not something that they're talking to their legislators about. It's not something that happens, but it doesn't happen in my community, so I'm not worried about it kind of mentality. And not to say that everybody, feels that way, but I think that feeds into that.
Would you say you help mostly or a high percentage of your clients are lower income families?
I don't know the statistics on that personally, but I would say I think that's likely more with folks that are accessing our shelter services, because people that do have more resources are probably not going to choose to go to a shelter. Okay. They're going to pay for their own apartment or, find a roommate to rent with or use their financial resources to find somewhere else safe to stay. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
The shelters then probably just provide like a very basic like backstop for the people who are struggling the most and would otherwise be either forced to remain where they are in difficult situation or cast out and into homelessness or other things. So.
Yep, or staying in a homeless shelter or
which doesn't have the resources needed to move forward probably.
Right. Well, the homeless shelters don't have the advocacy element,
Right,
and they
yeah.
aren't informed about domestic violence in the same way, and aren't able to support in the same way.
And I don't know too many with like education programs or anything like that I know of around here. I'm sure there are some that exist, but
The programs that, I mean, you mentioned before the show that some of the programs that you were most excited about or passionate about personally were ones that were off the, like not being funded this year. What were they? And in your experience, like what impacts have you seen through participating in them previously when they were, or I believe that they were from.
Yeah, so I think what you're referencing, what I was talking about earlier, is the closing of our offender education programming. I was the program manager for SMOPE, is what we call it, for about a year and a half. And I would say that I went into that work apprehensive and unsure about, can these people that use violence really change, and was transformed by my experience working with people that use violence, and seeing that a lot of them really did want to change, and I did see learning and growth. I mean, not everybody that goes through the programming had the same impacts, but I think there's hope, and I think people can change, and that's going to make for safer communities. Because even, advocacy is so important, but we're getting involved after the violence has already happened.
Yeah.
So if we can intervene, but to prevent somebody from enacting further violence, that I think that's the goal, really.
are these like court-appointed classes, or do these things people sign up for on their own? Or
Yeah, so it's state mandate that anybody that is criminally convicted with a domestic violence related charge has to go through some kind of domestic abuse transformation programming.
Okay.
However, it is an underfunded mandate. There has been some funding made available for this programming, but very limited and for short periods of time. So we weren't able to utilize that in the way we would have liked to. And so we were running on like charging the program participants themselves for the programming, but that really limited accessibility of the programming. And it just wasn't sustainable, because even if we were saying we were charging them, not everybody had the funds.
Yeah, well, I'm sure some of these people are like fresh out of prison or losing their jobs, or like they committed a crime of some sort. Not necessarily that they went through a legal process for it, but totally makes sense that people like that wouldn't have access to a program they have to pay for.
Right.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, you said you had felt a degree of like transformation. Was that like a hopefulness that you believe that people could change?
Yeah. Yep. I think so. And like just really seeing it. I think I tend to be more of a hopeful person in general, but actually seeing it happen, and then having conversations with guys in group who are like, I'm gonna go tell my nephew about this. I know he's having some problems with his girlfriend, or I'm talking to my son about this stuff, and seeing like the impacts of that, because oftentimes it's a social, cultural kind of issue. Violence is something that is learned through our family units and our culture and our socialization. But to see the ripple effects of that was really inspiring for me.
I don't think anyone ever explicitly told me not to intimidate people. But I certainly growing up, I was told that I should be assertive and dominant, and that if I'm not getting my way, I should, it is that status quo. It's patriarchy leaking into what is now a more progressive society, and still just being there. Like I feel I no one ever told me not to do violence, except for like being like, oh, you might get in trouble, So I think it is, you need education to not do the thing, like for sure. Otherwise you're just counting on people to have the experiences to, get the empathy necessary to not behave that way.
Victims or offenders are overwhelmingly victims. Not as an excuse, but it's just like the plain truth. Most people who offend because they were a victim themselves and never had the proper way to process it or get closure or whatever it is.
Is that something that you saw at all with the education program, where the offenders were in some cases being educated about their own experience.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. A lot of people that came to the programming had their own trauma experience or learned it through socialization in like a school culture or, a broader family or community culture that they talked about. And we intentionally talk about that in those groups to help people kind of process those things. Because you have to, I also want to say that there's lots of people that experience abuse that do not become violent too.
Absolutely.
So it's not a direct causal thing. And I think sometimes that's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But for the people that are impacted in that way, they need to understand where their belief system was formed that allows them to be violent before they can transform that belief system and build a new one.
Well, we talked about this Free Press article a little bit before too, and I think we should get into that because a lot of the money that was causing that hopefulness that you might end up expanding your program ended up being given to public safety, and so my understanding is that it wasn't properly earmarked, and there's kind of like a crossing of paths where it's like, well, this was given for advocacy services through there, and then it basically isn't being done. Like they weren't properly told that. So it's like, call your legislator, talk to public safety. You're getting that from both sides. And my immediate, take would be that the reason that places that CADA exist and are funded is because, services like the police or public safety are not well equipped to deal with domestic violence. They're really only there for crimes that have already happened. Like if you can't point to a bruise or something like that, it's very difficult for the police to do anything. And I've seen that. I've seen a person who is, being intimidated by their partner, and they call the police, and the police are like, we don't know. Like there's nothing we can see that the house is a little bit trash, but like, what does it mean? Like, what's the crime? Do you want to charge him with something? And then they left. And I'm not saying that's every police involvement, but what exactly happened there? What's the misconnection with how those funds were allocated, and what's happening with them?
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, we requested the state legislator for an increase in funding. We got a small fraction of what was requested, and they said, well, part of the reason why that is because we're also allocating these other one-time dollars to counties to use for public safety. And we're going to highlight that those public safety dollars include victim service organizations. And so you should be seeing some of those dollars that are going to counties. And so contact your counties about that. In CADA's service area, there's about 10 million of those dollars are allocated for public safety, and we have not been approached or contacted or given promised any of those dollars. When we've reached out to city council members and county commissioners, they're saying that they weren't aware that funding was also for organizations like CADA, and so it's already been allocated for other public safety, law enforcement, fire department needs, and so they won't be able to provide those dollars. But even if we just got a fraction, we're not asking for the full 10 million, although that would be lovely, right? We're just asking for a fraction of that. Could be really supportive and helpful to the services that we provide and keeping it sustainable.
So this isn't something like a call to action issue so much as that it's like an accountability with the people who are put forward through the city, that like if the money has been sent through for that, like it needs to be written in such a way that the people who are spending the money understand that it's earmarked for that purpose. Otherwise, it could be just used for whatever. And I'm sure that I support the fire department and what they do. So I'm sure that they're using the money very well over there at the fire department.
Yes, there is one county I believe that is buying a new fire truck that's very needed. So like we understand, like we don't want to be, first of all, it's kind of unfortunate that we're put in a position where we're competing
Absolutely.
for resources with other organizations that are doing public safety work. But you know, if it could be shared, I think there is a call to action opportunity. I think specifically more in Mankato and North Mankato. I think there is opportunity to still contact city council members and county commissioners and request that they allocate a percentage of the funding to CADA. I think we've been sending out postcards that are requesting a 15% allocation because that's the percentage of crimes that are domestic violence or sexual assault related. So that's how that number was.
And that would get you that 1.5 million number too.
That's really impactful, I think, because I mean, a lot of times I really like to reinforce these issues where, you know, these are small number ballot issues where I think that people, even the size of our audience here, our listenership, you know, school board elections, talking to your city council members on something like this, like that could, like, you know, having shelter beds is something that like directly impacts the people. Like these,
Absolutely.
you know, this isn't like a state program. These are state funds going to people who are doing advocacy work. So, you know, I would really, you know, follow up on that. If you know your city council person and you live here in Mankato, you know, try and follow up on that and ask if they know about this issue, what they're doing about it, because it's important, and you know, to follow, you know, what your money's doing.
Yeah. And if you don't know, it's really easy to find out online. Just Google who is my city council member, and it'll pop up a website with a link where you put in your address and it tells you who to contact. So.
Sure. Well, it seems, you know, good to me that we aren't going to lose everything, that it's pretty robust here. And like also thinking about it on a national level, like Mankato, or I mean, not Mankato, I mean, Minnesota being a place that is now like a sanctuary state for abortion. And it seems like, you know, we're going to get some of this stuff enshrined into law because we have progressive politicians right now who seem to want to respond in that way. I hope that is a positive situation for you. And I really do feel for people who are in reactionary states who are going to be cutting this stuff left and right.
Yeah.
Do you have any insights into what it might be like for people who are, you know, running shelter in, you know, places in the country that are less accepting, or is that just something that isn't a communication going on?
I don't think I understand the question.
Oh, I mean, like, you know, in places like like we've acknowledged that Minnesota is a very progressive area, but like, you know, think about the exact opposite. Like, what are the opportunities like for people who are wanting to do advocacy work and for the people who are in need of advocates? And it's fine if you just don't know, because like obviously. Yeah,
I don't think I can really speak to that, but I mean, I do know that there are states that have even less funding, and you know, they, like I was saying, there's states that don't have a service organization in every county, I think, and the services that they are able to provide are much more limited. So, it would be unfortunate to see Minnesota become a state like that.
I have a kind of another question that you might not know the answer to, but I'm pretty curious on what these conversations look like when you're asking for funding versus like another program. Are these like super database conversations? Is it like whoever gets the most, whoever's the loudest in the ear of the legislator is who he picks? Is it like how much of this talk is like data and analyzation based, and how much of it is it you just have to like advocate for yourself as hard as you can?
I would say I think it's mostly advocacy.
That's interesting.
I mean, I'm not in the room when the legislators are making their decision. We do have a really strong like state coalition. I myself and other members of CADA were up at the Capitol advocating for this increase in funding, and along with lots of other advocates and service organization members from across the state, asking our legislators to make sure that we were seeing this funding. And when you're in the room with them, they're all saying, yep, we agree, this is an important issue, we're here to support you. But then somewhere along the line, that isn't translating to the dollars that we're asking for.
I see.
And I think, you know, like we were talking about earlier, it just comes down to community support and what they're hearing from their constituents. So I think it's important for people to get out there and contact their state legislators as well and let them know that they're concerned about the state of funding for victim service organizations and the impact that can have on their communities.
And I think it's worth pointing out that like you aren't turning to these communities and being like, hey, we need this money so we could support you. You're like advocating for the money from the state and trying to put these programs in without even taking in yourself. And it seems like the number, like really all you're asking for is for people to advocate to you, which is a very easy thing for people to do. So yeah, I guess if you care about this, you need to get on the horn, write some letters, send some emails.
And for someone who's interested in doing that, they've like heard this so far and they're like, I want to do that. Can you like try to reiterate just a little bit of like the language that might help someone get up to speed if they were going to have that conversation? Like I heard just a moment ago, you said something to the effect of funding victim service organizations, but like what is the language that like that's in the bills or in the funding that would help someone quickly start to have a conversation about the important part?
Yeah, I would not say I'm the expert on the best language to use, but that is the language that I use. Victim service organizations focusing specifically on organizations that serve survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. I think a good resource for that would probably be our state coalition website, Violence Free Minnesota. I'm sure they have all kinds of great talking points and tools for talking to your representatives. But I think really what's most impactful is sharing personal experience or personal connection to the issue, talking about the impacts in your community, and what's important to you. I think it's best for it to come from the heart rather than a script. But I do understand that those scripts can make making that step a lot easier for other people too. So.
Okay.
Sure. And do you have any other kind of like stories or impacts that you just want to share from your time at CADA that you think could be just like good things for the audience to hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many that it's hard to like focus the topic on just one clear, solid answer. I mean, I've worked at CADA for 8 years, and in that time, I've worked in every program. So I started as a shelter intern, and I saw the direct impacts of people like having an immediate safety need and being able to provide that. And I also saw the impacts of when we were full and having to safety plan with people about how to sleep safely in their car that night. So I see what we can do and how beneficial it can be when the resource is available. And I also see the need for more resources in that area. I've also worked in community advocacy, providing that legal advocacy and resource support and education that we've talked about, and have had many survivors say that they don't know what they would have done without CADA's support, and how instrumental it was for their safety and their mental, emotional, physical health, all of the above. I've seen in the offender education work that I do, I've had people that use violence talk about how impactful that programming has been for them, and share direct examples of how they're being different in their current relationships, their newer relationships. And I'm hopeful. I mean, they would be very excited to come at the end of programming and tell me about all the new things that they're doing. And similarly with our supervised visitation center, we've had people that came into programming very reluctant and not wanting to engage in that kind of programming, thinking it wasn't really for them. And then they leave and they're like, wow, this really changed my perspective on the way that I parent and how I want to co-parent moving forward. I can't say that happens every time, but I would say across the agency, I have heard positive impact stories about how this work is really changing people's lives and keeping them safer. Similarly to our community education programming too, people are learning things every time we're sharing information about these issues, and that can only lead to safer communities.
You mentioned a little while ago that like the turnover is kind of high for this job, and for you as someone who's been a part of it for so long, like what's kept you engaged with it when it seems difficult to, for the organizations to hold on to people like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that CADA in particular has put a lot of effort and focus into building a healthy and supportive workplace culture. It's a workplace culture like unlike any other I've ever engaged in. We're really conscientious about having open dialogue, direct, ethical, collaborative communication. Then that helps. I mean, when you're in a high stress, vicarious trauma kind of scenario, sometimes that can easily come out in toxic ways in the way that we interact with other people that we're working with. And so we talk about that, and we give tools to navigate that and prevent that. And I think wellness is a priority, and our understanding of trauma also applies to how we engage with the people that work in the organization. So overall, it's just, for me, it's a really great place to work. I actually left and did AmeriCorps for a year, and then I came back to CADA. I worked at a treatment center for a short while after AmeriCorps, and I couldn't wait to come back to CADA because of the culture. I also have a passion for the work that I think will keep me in it for the long run.
Well, and funding's of critical importance for sure, because high turnover on jobs and or lack of security from like an organizational standpoint certainly doesn't do a good job of helping the people that they're trying to help. I think making sure that there's stability within the culture, within the employees, within the directors of a space is probably critical in being able to help people and make things better. And I know here in Mankato, we're really fortunate to have CADA, and appreciate all the work that you and that organization do.
Thank you.
Is there anything else we'd like to leave people with, somewhere that they can engage directly with CADA in support, or again, if they need any kind of support themselves, maybe how to get in touch?
Yeah, so I would add, in addition to, contacting your local lawmakers like we've been talking about, you can also be directly involved with CADA. We are always seeking volunteers and interns. People can donate directly to us. We do have our annual fundraiser, Galentine's Day, in February, and tickets for that are going on sale on December 20th. And we're also still looking for sponsors for that event. So that's another great way to support our organization. Reaching out and seeking education if you're part of a community group that would be interested in learning more about CADA. We do all kinds of presentations, from Domestic and Sexual Violence 101 to CADA services to domestic violence kind of first response, how to support a survivor in your life. And we're open to providing education that meets specific needs. So if there's a certain request that a community group has, we can see if that's something we can provide. So lots of ways to get involved right here in your community.
Sure. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for everything you do personally, and for being part of what seems like a extremely valuable community resource here in Mankato.
Yeah. And we'll certainly provide some links in the description for how to contact CADA for whatever your needs are, and any other things you'd like us to provide there.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.